And Major Garrett is with me now from the White House. So, Major, in just 1 week, we have the Secretary of State who referred to the President of the United States as a moron. And now we've got Senator Corker, who has said that the White House is an adult daycare center. And if it is true, as Corker suggests, that many Republicans feel as he does and just simply haven't voiced it in the way that he did, what does that mean for the president's legislative agenda going forward?
Well, let's talk about the legislative agenda, and I'll get to some of the backstory on Senator Corker in a second. Look, the president needs every Senate Republican vote he can find to pass a budget, to continue to pursue tax reform, and if he has any hopes, which he still does, of reviving some effort to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. Corker has already expressed skepticism about tax reform, saying he won't vote for anything that increases the deficit by a dime. That means his vote might be up for grabs on the budget as well. So the president picking this time to have this feud with Corker is curious, to say the least, because what he needs is solidarity among Senate Republicans. And this feud will do anything and create anything but that. Now let's talk about what is so unusual about this particular feud. Back during the campaign, Senator Corker spoke by phone with candidate Trump frequently. During the transition, he was at Trump Tower more than once. He was on the short list, not the shortest list, but for the 5 last finalists for Secretary of State, that list included Bob Corker. These two gentlemen, meaning the President of the United States and Bob Corker, are not estranged, are not enemies, and had, by Republican standards during the campaign, about as good a working relationship as you could have found for someone who was not a full-throated early supporter of the Trump candidacy. So this falling out, now in full public view, places the president not only at odds with a generic Republican, which Bob Corker certainly is, but someone who's not running for re-election, which means he has maximum latitude to carry out politics precisely as he wants to and not have to worry about re-election, and someone with whom the president had a decent, if not pretty good, working relationship. And that just shows you how much things have deteriorated between this president and Republicans in Congress generally, and specifically with Corker, who was once not in the Trump inner circle, but certainly someone with whom the president confided, discussed foreign policy, and discussed politics with. That now clearly is over.
And Major, clearly, given his role in the Foreign Relations Committee and the fact that he and Secretary Tillerson are, from what I understand, very, very close, beyond just the legislative agenda, what does it mean, for example, when it comes to Iran?
Well, let's talk about the Tillerson-Corker relationship. I wouldn't describe them as very, very close. No one here in Washington is really, really close with Rex Tillerson. He was a CEO of ExxonMobil, an international, multinational corporation that kept Rex Tillerson very much busy and very much engaged on the world stage as a corporate leader. He didn't have a lot of close relationships here in Washington. However, what has brought Corker and Tillerson closer since Tillerson became Secretary of State is first the nomination process, which went through the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and then Corker's abiding sense that Secretary Tillerson, along with Secretary of Defense James Mattis, and now new Chief of Staff John Kelly, as that soundbite a moment ago indicated, really are sort of a working bulwark around President Trump to keep things on the rails and to keep things from getting, as Senator Corker said, chaotic. So Corker and Tillerson have developed this relationship not because they had one pre-existing, but because it's developed in relationship to their generalized concern about President Trump's approach to his job. And how Corker is now publicly articulating that is evidence of that relationship with Tillerson. Now, how does this all relate to Iran? Well, if the president intends to, and we've reported that he will do this, decertify the Iran nuclear deal, that throws everything back in Congress. Will Congress impose new sanctions? Whatever Congress does or doesn't do, Bob Corker, as chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, will have a heavy influencing hand on those decisions. So now Corker has leverage on the Iran deal as well. And he knows that the president has criticized him for being, quote-unquote, soft on the Iran deal, Senator Corker's perspective on that is President Obama was going to negotiate that deal no matter what the Republican Senate did. And what Senator Corker put forward was legislation that at least gives Congress some action and some voice in the constant recertification of that Iran nuclear deal. So Senator Corker would say on his behalf, he wasn't soft on the Iran deal. He put Congress at least in a position to have some say about it going forward. And that say going forward is likely to be set in motion by the president when he decertifies it in the coming days.
All right, Major, let me switch gears briefly and ask you, because, I mean, the looming threat of World War III, as Senator Corker puts it, is very serious. This one, you know, there are a lot of people buzzing about it. Vice President Mike Pence leaving the Indianapolis Colts game yesterday. The president tweeted earlier, quote, "The trip by VP Pence was long planned. He is receiving great praise for leaving game after the players showed such disrespect for country." So, Major, a lot of people are saying this was a political stunt that cost taxpayers. I've seen reports of up to $200,000. Was it a political stunt?
Well, certainly some of the NFL players thought so. And perhaps some fans did. Other fans, as they have been throughout this controversy, remain divided on the entire issue itself. Kneeling, respect for the flag, the national anthem, the president's involvement in that at a very high level. All of that has divided people about the NFL, about the national anthem, about protests, about athletes. All of these things have become divisive subjects. However, let's just talk about what the president said this morning, that the vice president's trip was long planned. I don't know what he means by that, because the vice president's office said, well, the reason Vice President Pence stopped in Indiana is he was on his way back from Washington from Las Vegas, where on Saturday he attended a memorial dedication for the 58 victims of the massacre there on Sunday. Clearly, that was not a long-planned maneuver. That's something that arose out of this horrific national tragedy and something that was put together late last week. So I have no idea what the president means when he says long-planned. The vice president's office said, well, look, the vice president was in Las Vegas. He had to get back to D.C. anyway, which meant he would have flown over Indiana. So a brief stop there didn't really add anything to the taxpayer cost, if you will. People will evaluate whether or not this was a stunt, a waste of taxpayers' money. But when the president says long planned, I have no idea what he means, and I'm not quite sure the vice president's office does either. In any event, it appears that the vice president, knowing that there would be a protest at that football game, because it involved the San Francisco 49ers, a team that has regularly protested in this fashion during the national anthem, and whose former player, Colin Kaepernick, started all of this more than a year ago. The vice president had to know this was going to happen, and then therefore had to know what he was going to do about it. So it does feel as if, whether or not this was a stunt or not, that's terminology others can employ or not, it certainly looks to be a premeditated action by the vice president.
Yeah, and the vice president clearly also getting into a little bit of Twitter trouble because he tweeted out a picture that was 3 years old. So maybe, Major, you can show his communications team how to use Twitter going forward. Major Garrett.
If they ask.
If they ask, right. Major Garrett at the White House for us. Thank you, Major.
You got it.